I didn't have any idea of what the words meant, and yet I got this feeling that reminded me of a couple of things from when I was younger. So one was when I was about 5 or 6, and I was like a very bookish little girl, and wore glasses even then. And my dad took me to a library. And I remember looking around this library, and it was probably like a really little library, But to me it seemed huge and full of hundreds and thousands of books. And I was really excited because I thought, one day I can read all those books. In fact, there are more books than I'm ever going to be able to read. And all those books are full of stories and adventures and new experiences for me. So it felt I can really remember that sense of excitement and anticipation and adventure, seeing all those books in the library. And the second one I'm thinking I've talked about before, but when I was in my 30s, I took up sailing and kind of yachting sailing, where you're in a little boat on the sea. And again, I got that same sense of potentiality, because I could see that, I realised that if you learn how to sail properly, and you've got just a little boat, you can actually go pretty much anywhere. If you've got the skills, you've got the freedom to go anywhere. The whole world is open to you. And again, I had this sense of kind of the potential, the excitement, the freedom, this kind of opening up in front of me. And the Heart Sutra, even though it's just words, and I don't know why, it sometimes gives me that same feeling of potentiality. Which is amazing, really. So I don't know why it's so powerful. It is a mystery. It is a mystery. But we'll go into it a little bit and see perhaps some reasons why it might be. So first of all, where does it come from, the Heart Sutra? So a little history about sort of Buddhist texts. So what happened is the Buddha himself, as far as we know, didn't read or write. He was illiterate. And it's amazing for me to think that he did all those amazing talks and thought all those amazing things without writing them down at all, or reading them. But anyway, he couldn't read or write. And so he gave his talks, and he gave many hundreds, thousands of talks over his lifetime of teaching. And they were remembered. And then they were passed down in an oral tradition over hundreds of years, until a few hundred years after his death, they were written down. And the ones that are written down that are perhaps supposedly the word of the Buddha, they're in what's called the Pali Canon. And if you read the Pali Canon, you'll find that it is often quite repetitive. And that's because I think people learnt it in a particular way. If you're going to learn something off by heart and you're going to pass it on, you have to learn in quite a kind of repetitive way. But what happened with the Pali Canon is that gradually, I suppose, people became quite expert. Some people became experts in the Pali Canon. And some people started to write commentaries, and then other people wrote commentaries on the commentaries. And in that very human way, people started to take it very literally and get very pedantic about it. And it seems to be something that all humans do with everything. Any kind of guidance or rules or whatever. Well, any guidance we're given, we can turn it into rules very easily. Any kind of religious ideas we're given, we can turn them into something very concrete very easily as well. And that happened to the Pali Canon. So they would do things like write very useful texts, I think, but they would kind of like describe, 64 types of anger or 32 types of love, just very specific, kind of somehow getting away from the emotional, from the experience perhaps of being with the Buddha. And perhaps in response to this, actually, I just want to say, it's not that I don't like the Pali Canon. I love the Pali Canon. I find it really helpful. It's just that it started to be interpreted in a particular way. So in response to this, the Mahayana grew up. The Mahayana. And the Mahayana, literally, Maha means great, big. So whenever you see Maha as a word, it means really very big, very great, something like that. And the Mahayana grew up. And what that was it's no longer, all the writings of the Mahayana are no longer probably what the Buddha said. It's actually new texts, new writings that come from the experiences of very enlightened people at that time. And there are, again, hundreds, thousands of texts from that time. They were writing them for about 1,000 years or so you can imagine there are loads of them. And one part of those texts are called the Prajna Paramita. Got that on the next sheet. Prajna Paramita. So, the Prajna Paramita is an amazing, paradoxical and literally mind-blowing group of works, of texts. And they're literally mind-blowing because that is their intention. Their intention is to blow your mind open and to leave you feeling like you don't know anything, like the carpet's been taken out from underneath your feet. And pranya, that first bit, means wisdom. And paramita gets translated in different ways. So you might see it translated as perfection, in which case it means the perfection of wisdom. But it has more to it than perfection. Perfection might feel a bit kind of static. What it actually has is the idea of going over, moving over to the other side of the stream. One order member has translated it as leaping wisdom, which I think gets the kind of much more poetic sense of it, about a kind of sense of movement, so leaping wisdom. And there are a number of paramita texts, and gradually over time a bodhisattva figure became associated with those. And her name is Pranya Paramita as well. And here's a copy of a ripper of her. And she's a mature woman, and she's said to be made of lots and lots of golden Buddhas made of light. So if you can imagine a figure in this form, but she's actually made of lots of golden Buddhas, very small, made of light. So quite a kind of open kind of figure. And she's known as the mother of all Buddhas. And that's because her transcendental wisdom and her compassion is at the heart of all Buddhas. So that you couldn't really be a Buddha or a Bodhisattva without having that sense of the transcendental, of the wisdom that she portrays. So come and have a look later if you want. You probably can't see it very well from where you are. So the Pranya Paramita texts, there are many of them of different lengths. One of them is 100,000 lines, so it's very long. Then they get smaller and smaller. And this one that we're doing, the Heart Sutra, is the essence of these. It's on one page. It's the core of the teachings of the Pranya Paramita literature. And the Heart Sutra itself is very, very well used in the Buddhist world, very widely spread. So particularly Zen groups will chant it. Most Buddhist groups, as far as I know, from the Mahayana tradition, will chant the Heart Sutra. And the translation that we have here is just one translation. There are lots of versions. In fact, the translation we use in our movement was by someone called Philip Capello, who was a Zen practitioner, an American Zen practitioner. I have no idea why we ended up using that translation, but it's the one that we use. And interestingly, actually, there are slightly longer versions of it. And the one, I love the phrase that some of them start with, which is, homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy. Which I think is a lovely way to start kind of approaching the Heart Sutra. So, in structure, the Heart Sutra is actually a play. It's a drama between two characters. And in longer versions of them, one of those characters, Shariputra, is referred to. So what's happening is Avalokiteshvara, who is the Bodhisattva of compassion, is a conversation between him and Shariputra. And Avalokiteshvara is telling Shariputra about his experience, if you can call it that, what enlightenment is all about. Shariputra is one of the Buddha's main disciples. And it's actually interesting that Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva that says the Heart Sutra, because after all, you think it might well be a Bodhisattva of wisdom, not a Bodhisattva who is associated with compassion. But I think for me it goes back to the Buddha's pragmatism and his realism. So he wasn't interested in theory or philosophy for its own sakes. He practically wanted to know what we can do to overcome suffering, to transcend our human condition. And compassion arises when loving kindness, metta, comes into contact with suffering. So the Heart Sutra has flowed from metta, meeting suffering. It's not dry metaphysics, it's a response to suffering. It's an emotional text. And of course, in Buddhist terms, wisdom and compassion are just two sides of the same coin. If we see with wisdom how all beings suffer, if we have the wisdom to see that, then compassion will naturally arise. And actually, I think as well, if we have true compassion, if we really go deeply into unsatisfactoriness, we see impermanence as it really is, the lack of self-nature, then we will be developing wisdom as well. So they're both part of the same thing. So Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. This is an image of him. I don't know how well you can see it. So in this image he's got 1,000 arms and he's got 11 heads. Okay. So briefly his story is that he was a Bodhisattva, so he was a being who was set on enlightenment. And he was a being, and at that time he just had the conventional sort of one head and 2 arms. Okay? And he made a vow to save all beings from suffering and to lead them all beings to enlightenment. So he spent many, many years, you can imagine many eons, working away, trying to save all beings. But after many, many eons, he looked around Tibet actually, which is where he was, and he saw there were still millions and millions of suffering beings. And in response to that, he basically fell apart. He cracked open, fell to pieces, so that all his body fell apart. And then he was put together again by Amitabha, who was the Buddha of compassion, of love. And what Amitabha did is he rebuilt him with 1,000 arms and with 11 heads. So with the 11 heads, he can see all beings who are suffering. And those heads are going in all directions. Okay, so he can see beings everywhere. And with 1,000 arms, he can reach out and he can help all beings, using a whole range of different tools. And this image is also the myth of the Triratna movement, that we can all be one arm of Avalokiteshvara. So it's not like we're going to try and save the world on our own. We can't do that. If we try and do that, actually, we will fall apart. We will crack up. It's not possible. But if we become bigger, part of something bigger, open up to something bigger than ourselves, we can actually do a lot in the world. So we can become one arm of Avalokiteshvara. And it's interesting, actually, that there's a figure down that end called Huan Yin, who is a figure from China, and she's like a female version of Avalokiteshvara. So it's interesting that this being, this Bodhisattva of compassion, that sometimes has been male, sometimes been female. And because Avalokiteshvara looks down on the world and sees our suffering, one loose translation of his name is Kind Gazer, by the same order member who did the translation before, Kind Gazer, which I really like the idea of, someone he's looking kindly down on the sufferings of the world. So this figure of compassion is, I'm talking to Sariputra. And Sariputra is a great scholar, renowned scholar, but perhaps traditionally associated with this more pedantic, intellectual, kind of categorizing approach to the truth. Part of the school who took things very literally. So it's interesting that Sangha who's the founder of this Triratna Buddhist movement, he points out that you could see the Heart Sutra as a drama between the side of us which sees things literally, takes everything literally, which is a very human thing to do, and the part of us which sees the heart of things, which sees how things really are. Okay, so let's go into the sutra itself. Now the sutra is very rich. It might be just a few words, but it's very rich. And I'm not going to be able to cover it all in detail. So I've read it a lot, and I've recited it a lot, and I've listened to talks about it a lot, especially the last few days. I've thought about it, but of course my understanding is only going to be very partial, okay? And in some ways, perhaps we can't even understand the Heart Sutra intellectually, conceptually. It's something that it's good just to feel, let it have an effect on our emotions. So let's start with the beginning. So the Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas. So this is Avalokiteshvara in meditation. This is a meditation experience that he's describing. And he saw the emptiness. Emptiness is a translation of Sunyata. Sunyata, very important Buddhist word. Okay. So Sunyata here is translated as emptiness, but that could be, it's a very limited and perhaps even a misleading translation. Other words that people use are openness, boundlessness, mystery, even fullness, which is interesting. Okay? So what it's trying to get at is that things are not fixed, they're not permanent, nothing is fixed or permanent, none exist of its own right. All those things that we call things are actually processes. Because here we are as humans, we live in a very rich world. Our senses are picking up huge amounts of information all the time. And actually, there's even more, because our senses can't, take in everything that's going on, they're not made to, there's even more going on than we can pick up, actually. But what we have to do is we have to simplify, we have to classify. So we've developed a kind of shorthand for experience in words. We use words as a way to communicate with each other, and they're really important. So, for instance, if I was to say, could somebody please shut that door? Okay? It's really important that I can say, would someone please shut the door? Because then we can actually, shut the door when we need to. But the trouble is that in that sentence, there is a you, or a someone. I'm saying to somebody, will someone, there's a person, shut the door, and there's a door. And both of these things exist in some form, but we take for shorthand the fact that we have a word for it, we think we know what it is. So we just think, oh, it's a door, okay? Or we think it's just someone, there's someone you're the person who's going to shut the door. We think that you're just a person, okay? We don't have a sense of the mystery, of the openness, of people, of things. For instance, if we start with you, okay? Who are you? You're actually changing all the time. So 20, 30, 40, however many years ago, when you were a baby, you were very different, okay? 20, 30 years in the future, when you age, you'll again be physically, psychologically very different. You'll be changing all the time. And we change physically, obviously, and we change psychologically too. We change the kind of people that we are, the way that we behave, the way that we react to things changes. And my experience, particularly with Buddhists who are practicing quite intensely, is sometimes I can get quite trapped in how I see people. So there are two people who some of you will know who used to be involved with the Sangha here but have moved away. So I only see them a few times a year. So Ginny, who now lives at Taraloka, and Vajratara, who now lives at Tiratnaloka. I only see them a few times a year. But I really get trapped because every time I see them, they're different. They're both real intense practitioners as well. They're changing really fast. And I'll meet this person, I kind of talk to them like I talk to the old Ginny that I used to know, and she's really different. It's really interesting. And it's interesting how subtle that is, how subtly I think somebody's going to be a certain way, because that's how they were the last time I saw them. And then I realised, actually, no, she's changed. She's really changed. And we're all doing that. It's just I particularly notice it with Ginny and Vajratara because I only see them a few times a year. And actually, because they are really going for it. They are really working and changing. So I suppose, this sutra has a very profound meaning, but it also has this more mundane one, that actually we bring all the time, every time we have a discussion with someone, particularly if it's someone we have met before, we perhaps don't notice how they really are, because we're bringing the idea of what we think they're like to our conversation with them. And then sometimes that can really trap people. People can find that it's very difficult for them if they live in the same village all their lives or something, and they're changing, because people will see them as they were in the past and not give them room to become a new person. And I've had an experience, I once went on quite a short solitary retreat, and on this retreat I did a lot of letting go of views in different ways, views that I held. And when I came back, I spent a bit of time with a colleague who I have some difficulties with, or thought I had difficulties with, and then I spent some time with a friend who, again, I had this idea he was a very difficult person. And actually, because I was fresh off this solitary, where I'd let go of a whole load of views, and I somehow, I don't know how, let them be themselves, didn't bring my sense of these are really difficult people to my interaction with them, They were different. They were really lovely, actually, both of them. On the same day, were really kind to me and really open. And I was really overwhelmed by it, actually. I had a really nice time with them both. And I was really overwhelmed by the fact that it was me that was bringing this whole idea that these were difficult people to my interactions with them, and how I'd limited them and limited me by this idea of how things were. So this is true of people, that we actually don't really know what people are like. Actually, they're changing. But it's also true of things. So, for instance, if you've ever tried sketching anything, it's amazing how it doesn't look like you think it should look. Because I don't do much sketching. I probably only do it occasionally, like if I'm on a retreat or something and someone says, do some sketching, I do it. And it's like I try and draw a tree and I go, oh, trees aren't really like the idea I have of trees. You know, they look quite different. So it can be quite interesting to kind of, to draw things, to see what they're like. So I suppose what I'm saying is that we can have a schema. We can have a schema of what reality is, and we bring it to reality, and reality is not like that. And actually, all things, part of the schema we might have is that things are separate, but actually they are completely, utterly interconnected. So we can't say where anything that we call a thing begins or ends if we look into it. So that door over there, it's part of a huge web of conditions that have created it being there. So whoever built this church or whatever at some point must have decided they wanted to have that particular shape of door, and they would have gone out and got some wood, presumably, and made that wood into the door. But the wood would have come from a tree, and that tree was once a sapling, and before that I presume it was a seed, and before that it was another tree, so it goes back. And that tree will have needed sunshine, rain, a forester, all sorts of things to make it into a tree. And you'll have done this before probably, but if you kind of explore this and look through it, it's part of a whole web of conditions where basically it relies on everything in the world. You know, the whole history of the universe has gone into creating that door, it being the colour it is, it being how it is here. We can't really say where it stops and where it ends if you look into it. So this is what Avalokiteshvara, coming back to him in the Heart Sutra, saw about himself in a way. That he doesn't exist beyond interconnectedness with this great web of conditions, nor is he unchanging. So he saw that he had no inherent standalone self. So when someone says you don't have a standalone self, they certainly don't mean you don't exist, okay? Because we all do exist. It's just we don't exist in the way that we think we exist. So if you imagine in a river, there's like a little eddy, and it's kind of, you know, maybe it's even a little pool in a river. And it has an identity. You can say to somebody, there's that eddy, you know, and it's there the next day or whatever. And it exists, but it's not separate from the river. And if it started to think, for some reason, that it was separate from the river and tried to make itself separate, it would get itself in trouble. And that's what we do. So it's basically, we are part of existence, and yet it's completely natural. It's a human thing to do. We create this thing that we call I, that we call me, ourself. And we feel, because it seems to be our experience, that it is separate from the rest of existence. And also that it will continue unchanging. And actually, because it doesn't really exist in a separate way, it's very insecure. And it's always looking for validation, for something to identify with, for something so that it knows that it exists, even though it doesn't. And this is really where we just get in such a lot of suffering, such a lot of trouble. So we compare, okay? So we kind of create this idea. So somebody says to me, when I was a little girl, they'll go, oh, you're really good at reading and you really love books, okay? So I get this idea, I'm the kind of being that really likes reading and really likes books. So I get a whole sense of identity in that, and that's fine, probably quite helpful, until I meet somebody who's an even better reader than me. Okay, and then I'm really in trouble because I've got this whole sort of thing, kind of really identified with being a really good reader. And if someone's better than me, well, who am I? What am I? You know, it really challenges me. And it's interesting that there'll be all sorts of things that we identify with that give us a problem. So you might not identify with being a good reader, so that might not be an issue for you. But there'll be something you identify with that I don't, that will cause you problems. So it's quite interesting, if we're kind of going about our everyday life and we find that something somebody says or whatever like starts to press a button, it's really interesting to look at it because it might well show us that that's something we're really identifying with about ourselves. That's the kind of person we are. We're somebody who's good at cooking, we're somebody who's good at cleaning, we're somebody who's really good at making loads of money, we're somebody who's really good at running, all those kind of things that we could be, you know, that we identify with. Okay. And I just think, you know, if you can imagine what Avalokiteshvara in some ways is doing, he's describing being free of all those identities, being free of all the suffering that comes from comparing ourselves with other people, from having this sense of ourselves as a certain kind of person. So, the next bit of the sutra goes, and we haven't got very far yet, but don't worry, I'm not going to go through it all in this detail. So, the next bit talks to us the emptiness of all 5 skandhas. 5 skandhas. So, skandhas is the Buddhist jargon for how we experience the world. And it's actually described in the next bit of the sutra. So, in this particular translation, and you'll see it translated in different words, these 5 ways that we divide up our experience are called form, feeling, thought, choice, and consciousness. Okay, so just stop for a minute and just be aware of what's going on in your psychophysical world. What are you experiencing right now? Okay, so you might have been aware of your body. Okay, so that's what the sutra is referring to when it says form. It's your body and other objects. Your body in the world, kind of things. Okay, these are form. So you might have feeling, the next one, is sensations. You might have been aware of sensations, some pleasant, some unpleasant. You might have been aware of some thoughts or perceptions. So this is actually where you recognise and name things. So you go, that's a chair, that's a chair, that's a chair, that's a cushion. It's good if you get it right. There's a Peter. There's a Jordana, and so on. You recognise and perceive certain beings, things, okay. And you might have found, as you're sitting there, you might have thought something like, oh, I'd like to move, okay, I'd like to get out here and have a cup of tea, or I'd like to move my body, get rid of that ache. And that's what is called choice here. So that's volition, it's translated as sometimes, or urges, propensities. And then there's consciousness. So that's us being aware. And all these other experiences are held in consciousness. Now, there's loads that can be said about these 5 ways of dividing up our experience, and I'm not going to go into them now. It could be like a whole talk on their own. In fact, I should imagine a very long retreat on their own, actually. And don't worry, actually, if they seem quite strange or arbitrary, because I think for some Westerners, well, for me, anyway, they just seem kind of a weird way of dividing up my experience, which doesn't kind of really relate to how I've learnt about my experience in the world. But what's important about them is that basically they're just saying those 5 skandhas, those ways of dividing up your experience, they are the whole of your experience. There's nothing else going on. Okay? And what Avalokiteshvara saw was he saw that all 5 of them were empty in that translation, or Sunyata. And so he saw that in all of us, there's no fixed, no unchanging, no unconnected self. That's the important thing in that bit. And by realising that, he sundered the bonds that caused him suffering, which is quite interesting. Because I think that if you were to really see it, really know it, so not just know it intellectually, but know it in your heart, to know in your gut, actually, that you're a process, that you're constantly changing, that you're intimately interconnected with everything. Okay, and that's all you are. So there's nothing on top, there's no I, there's no superstructure, no controller, nothing like that. Then you would be free from all sorts of suffering. Because you'd be free from the suffering of pride, of wishing that things were different. You'd actually perhaps be free from the fear of death. Because you'd actually know in your bones that you are dying every minute. every second. And that we've already died millions of times. And so that when we take our final breath and our heart stops, that's actually just part of a process. Okay? We are just a process of energy of going through the world. So Avalokiteshvara, in a deep meditative state, he sees this. He sees that form, our body, is only emptiness. And he's seen that, he's really deeply experienced it. It's not an intellectual idea. So, but then he goes on, which is interesting, to say that emptiness is only form. So emptiness is only form. Form is only emptiness, but emptiness, shunyata, is only form. So even shunyata doesn't exist independently from phenomena, of course. It's the emptiness of emptiness. And it's really interesting, actually, because nothing can exist outside of those 5 skandhas, but yet we kind of want to make it. We want to make it shunyata, which is a process. We want to make it a thing. It's such a very human thing to do that. And I think there's something about really kind of meditating on the art of form and emptiness and form, which is really interesting and kind of opens something out. So one of my kind of magical experiences, I suppose, with the Heart Sutra is just being in meditation on a retreat, a long retreat, and getting really irritated with that phrase, form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Just kind of like, well, what does that mean? It's all right to say it, but what does it really mean? And I think because I got so irritated with it and worked out, I just kind of, something in my being just kind of let go of it. And it meant that when I left that meditation and I went outside, I saw the world in quite a different way for a short period. And it was like, I think it's one of the sort of biggest experiences I've had. And it happened because I'd really been meditating on that phrase, and I'd let something in me just kind of let go, some kind of conceptual way of seeing the world had let go. I'd really changed perspective on things. So I think this paradoxical nature of all this pranyāparamita stuff, which can seem so irritating, actually really does work. You can use concepts to wear out the concepts, and then reality can come and take its place. Okay, so then it goes on to say, all things are by nature void, they're not born or destroyed, they do not wax or wane, nor are they pure or stained. So it's saying what I've been saying, that things are, they don't have inherent self-existence, they are interconnected. And also then looking actually in some ways at the kind of human thing we do, the concepts, the conventions we have in language. So for instance, something is born or destroyed. If you were to explore that, you'd realise that's just a convention. Because if you were going to say, when is something born? So when is a life created? That's a kind of really interesting question. Because actually, is it when we're physically born? Is it when we're conceived? Is it when our parents started seeing each other? Is it when our parents were conceived? You can't actually, in this whole network of things going on, you can't say that point at which where life actually begins. And as I said, the same with death. And of course it's a useful convention to say, I was born in a certain place on a Saturday, but it's very misleading if we start to believe that as an absolute truth. And there are dualisms as well. So we work as humans with dualisms. So something's stained or it's pure. But actually, stained and pure are just ideas, and they only work relatively. So they only work in relation to each other. They only work in reference to each other. Okay, so basically the sutra then goes on to explore that with all the different skandhas, and then it moves on to the senses. So you could go, okay, I take your point, I'm not going to put my trust in any concepts, but surely I can trust my senses. So what I see, what I hear, and also what's in my mind, because Buddhism has the mind as one of the senses as well. So our memories, our thoughts are one of the 6 senses that it has. But no, the sutra says your senses, your sense organs are shunyata as well. So I think this one particularly used to annoy me actually, because I used to think, if I touch something, and that's fine, it exists, And if I see something, and it exists. But actually just a little bit of thought, and you can see this isn't true. So firstly, our sense organs have, they've evolved very specifically for the human niche that we occupy in the world. So Laura Dog, who's hopefully fast asleep down there, she's going to have a very different experience of this room when she's awake, probably when she's asleep as well actually, but of this room than we do. Her experience is rich in smells. she'll be picking up all sorts of things, probably about our emotions as well, actually, that we as humans don't pick up about the world. She's living in a very different world from us. So that's one thing, is, actually, our senses just give us a very small part of the experience of what's going on. The second is, of course, we'll have experienced how our senses can be changed by our conditions or by our emotional states. So, that door that I have paid very little regard to, actually, if I were on retreat and meditating a lot and really looked at it, or just really looked at it anyway, I would have a very different experience of it. I could start to see those colours as very beautiful, that kind of orangey red is very beautiful, very vivid. It would look like a different door to me. So I would see it differently. So our senses are empty as well. We can't rely on our senses. So then he goes on, so you think, okay, I can't rely on concepts, can't rely on senses. What about the teachings of the Buddha? Surely I can rely on those as being true and real. So the sutra says, no, no you can't. And what it does next is it goes through some key teachings of the Dharma, which are actually the 12 Nidana chain, which is, let me just open actually the sutra. Yes, so it goes through no ignorance or end of it. That verse is actually the 12 Nidana chain, which is the outside of the wheel of life. So if you were around from when we were talking about the wheel of life, we've come across the wheel of life, that's that outside bit. So it's like a key Buddhist teaching. And this sutra is saying, no, that is empty too, that is Sunyata as well. Then it talks about, so what's pain, cause of pain, ceasing pain, noble path to lead from pain. Is anyone recognising that? Yay! The Four Noble Truths. And if you've done the intermediate course, you'll know that we frame the whole of the course around those really vital, important Buddhist teachings. Yet they are Sunyata as well. And it even goes on to say, not even wisdom to attain, attainment to is emptiness. So basically what it's saying is these are just concepts. They're really very useful concepts. In fact, they're really important concepts, but they are just concepts. And don't hold on to them too tightly. However, I think we need to be just a bit beware here, a bit of a warning, is we do need these teachings actually. The only way we'll open up to Sunyata, the Sunyata of things, is to get ourselves in a condition where we can take it in. And the only way we'll do that is by following the traditional Buddhist path. There's a couple of kind of things here. So first of all, somebody once said that a misunderstanding of Sunyata is like picking up a snake the wrong way and the snake turns around and bites you. And the second is that there's an idea that we might, you've probably heard, that you use the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, as a raft to take you across to the other side, but you need to let go of the raft. Well, the trouble is, if you get off that raft too early, when you're still in the stream, you're going to drown. So you actually need to make sure that you're ready to let go of the teachings before you do. There really aren't any shortcuts, because this I think can sound a bit like there are shortcuts, and there aren't. It's a bit like we need to hold at the same time. We need to do the teachings, but we need to hold them lightly and not take them too literally. But we still need to do them as well. Okay. So basically, to summarise, so far, the sutra said that, anything we might be able to hold on to is actually Sunyata. It's empty of inherent existence. It doesn't exist as a standalone concept in its own right. And this is what the Bodhisattva really knew. So the next part of the sutra says, the Bodhisattva holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. So basically, I think a key thing here is holding on to nothing. And I think that's quite a scary thought until we've built up a huge amount of metta, a huge amount of positivity. To try to do that in any big way is a mistake. Because, we just need a lot of experience before we can do that. Sangha Night says we need to be a happy, healthy human being before we can start to let go of this sense of having some kind of a inherently fixed self. But I think we can, in everyday life though, we can let go of ideas though. We might not be able to completely let go of this idea of ourself being a certain way, or existence being a certain way, but what we can do is let go of all sorts of views we hold, let go of ways that we are in the world. That is definitely part of spiritual growth. Okay, so then it goes on to say that all Buddhas of past and present have done this the same way, and they've used this prajna wisdom, this Sunyata, this holding on to nothing whatsoever, to come to full and perfect vision. And then we finish with praise of the mantra, the radiant peerless mantra, the prajna paramita. And I think it's really important actually that we have like the figure of prajna paramita and we have the mantra as well, because we can perhaps think of this as quite an intellectual process. And I think the mantra and the figure of prajna paramita can help us to get in touch with much deeper parts of ourselves, that they need to change as well. Because the whole point of understanding this kind of wisdom is we have to change it at a really deep level. It's no good just intellectually knowing it. So if for instance, I intellectually do know that things are impermanent, I've thought about it a fair bit. However, like I heard today about an accident in which some people died, and I was really shocked. I felt a real sense of that is not how it should be in the world. Okay, that was my response to it. Things should not be this way. I was like aggrieved with reality that people should die, and yet, if I knew impermanence, really knew it, I don't think I would have that sense of kind of outrage at death, which I have had in the past as well. So there's such a difference between intellectually knowing something and really knowing it in our guts, in our whole beings. And the mantra can really help us do that, as can the figure as well. Okay, so this magical mantra, I'll just say a little bit about it. Because some mantras don't have any particular meaning or anything, or a translation. Well, they have a meaning, but they don't have a translation. This does have a translation as well. But of course, it's not the whole meaning of it. It means much more than that. But the translation is something like, gone, gone, gone completely beyond. Gate, the first gate is this gone, completely beyond. The second gate is gone, crossed over. Paragate is completely crossed over. And parasangate can mean collectively, all together, all beings. Because actually, how could I go over to the other side when on my own, when in that sense I don't exist on my own? Okay? So there's a whole collective sense in this mantra. So it's gone, gone, completely crossed over. Bodhi is awake, enlightened. And Svaha is kind of, that's it, hooray, right on. One talk I heard, someone said, bingo. Svaha was that kind of sense of, that's it. So the whole of the mantra together is about going beyond, going completely beyond. All of us together going completely beyond, waking up to that's it, to realising what reality is. Okay, so I'll just finish now, but just one last thing. So if you have been to a puja, or if you come on Sunday, you'll see that most people, or some people, know the Heart Sutra off by heart. Which is an interesting phrase, isn't it? Off by heart. We know something off by heart. It's quite a lovely phrase. But I think it is really, if you're intrigued by it, it's really worth learning it off by heart. Because that means you've always got it. You've always got it to hand, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And you can somehow engage with it in a different way if you're not having to read it, if you actually know it. So I find it quite difficult to learn off by heart, but this one I have learnt it, and it's great to have it. Okay, so I'll just give you a loose translation of that mantra to finish off with, a translation made by an order member. And that is, leap, leap, leap over. All of you, leap over. Awake, that's it.